Good morning. Welcome to our class together. Today we're going to finish the book of First Timothy and then move on to Second Timothy next week. But today we want to talk about a subject that is ever present, especially in our society today and really in all time. Paul would not have said anything about it if it was not a problem in his time, and we need to say a lot more about it in our own time. I want to start with a story. Leo Tolstoy wrote a short story called How Much Land Does a Man Really Need? It's the story of a Russian peasant named Pashim. Pashim's a poor farmer who yearns for more land. He dreams of he'll be the richest and largest farmer in his village. So one night an angel comes to him and tells him that his wish has been granted. On a particular day, he will be given the amount of land he can walk around in a single day. Sun up to sundown, whatever the circuit is, if he completes it, that will be his parcel of property. He takes some time. He finds the largest parcel in his area and he walks it. He wants to make sure his pace is good. He measures it. He checks where each hour he should be in order to finish just in time. The day came and he started walking. He made good time at the beginning, but then as the sun rose, it grew warm and uncomfortable. He slowed his pace. By noon, he was behind by several minutes. By 3, the several minutes had become at least an hour, and it would take a lot farther to get to the end of his destination. So he started to run. But as the sun was setting, he was not very far from his goal, so he ran as fast as he could. And when he got to the end, as he got to the last step, the sun set. And with that, he collapsed and died of a heart attack. The men of the town carried Pasha out, dug a hole 6 feet deep, 6 feet long, and 3 feet wide. Tolstoy said, "How much land does a man need? Enough for a grave." It's something that both Jesus and Paul talk about, the pursuit of wealth. Our society is attuned to accumulation. Just think about it. You go to the Amazon, and with a single click, without even thinking much more about it, you can purchase almost anything. Google throws up more ads than it does information. The reason is because the more you buy, the more money they make. And Facebook seems to read our mind because when we're talking about something in the room, it seems like the next thing that shows up on our feed is what we were just talking about. That's kind of creepy, frankly. So we have this problem, and the problem is with more. We need more and more, and we're never satisfied with the life that we have. So as we end our study in 1 Timothy, Paul wants us to consider how to keep a healthy and spiritual view of money. I'd like to start with 3 truths about money. The first is that wealth is neither condemned nor poverty praised. There are plenty of rich men in the Bible. There was Solomon and his vast amounts of wealth and the gold he accumulated. Job begins and ends the book that bears his name with great wealth. And Abraham was wealthy as well. Now, God doesn't ever connect their faith with their wealth. That's an aberration that's taken place in modern American religious thought. Instead, it's just an observation. These are men who were faithful, but who were also wealthy. And so there's nothing to be said about the poor man is better than the rich man. What is spoken of is not about amounts, but about desire and about what you do with your wealth. And the second truth is the problem of money is not the having it, but the desiring of it. Paul says that for those who desire to be rich fall into a temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. That term desire is the same word that we usually get lust from, but it can mean any kind of desire, but it tends to be a very strong one. It is to constantly want more. It's a thirst. It is a potato chip feeling that you can't eat just one, you have to have another and another and another. Now, while most people say, I don't have all of that, their pursuit might say otherwise. Because Paul goes on and in verse 10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered from their faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Now, probably that is the most misquoted text in Scripture. It's usually said money is the root of all evil, but that's not what Paul says. Paul blames the affection for it. And that's a word that the money, the love of money, is a single word which describes miserliness, that intense passion to hold on to what we have and not let it go or let anyone else have it. And he goes on to call it a craving. A craving is something that occupies your mind all the time. If you're always thinking about money, you have a craving. So the question is, what is a materialist? We always say materialism is bad. And therefore, if you're rich, you must be materialistic. But again, it's not just amounts that we're talking about. A poor man can be just as materialistic as a rich man, because if all he thinks is the lack of the money that he has or doesn't have, and what he would love to do if he had the money to spend it, he commits the same error as the wealthy man who is the miser. I just want you to think about what happened last week in America. Last week, there was a lottery that topped $1 billion. Now, 1 billion is a significant amount, no matter what you say. And I remember the news had it all over every single newscast, and it seemed like everything was being spoken of. Everybody's talking about this $1 billion. And the question was always asked, what would you do if you won $1 billion? Now that puts your mind to turning. What would I do? What would it be like? What would my life be different like? If I could do this, if I could do that. It puts money into your mind, into constant thought. And that's the problem. That's the desire. That's the craving that Paul speaks of. When you're always occupied with money, how much you have, how much you don't have, how much you make, how much you want to make, how much debt do you have, how many assets do you have, all of those things, if that preoccupies your mind and your life, that's the difficulty of this passage. The philosopher Epicurus said, "To whom little is not enough, nothing is enough." It's always about your desire. But the third great truth that Paul wants to speak about in this is that money is tied to how we see ourselves. Now, in this passage, Paul paints a portrait of people in the chapter and what they have to do with their money. He talks about in terms of the context of false teaching, but it's connected in this passage in a different way. He talks of a man who is he is puffed up with conceit, he says, and understands nothing. That's verse 4. He's puffed up with conceit. He has made himself so large that he loses sight of himself. Some people think they are so important that they cannot see what they have become. And Paul would continue in verse 17 and connect these two dots in some way, because he connects the two attitudes. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty. A haughty man is when someone who thinks himself so important that and so entitled that he starts demanding things from life. Do you not know who I am? Do you not know how much money I have? There are people who say that, who intimate that because of their wealth, they are to be treated special because they are much more important than someone else. But you don't have to be rich to do that. We can start to believe that all by ourselves. We think it because we view life at times as if we did everything on our own. Jesus tells a parable in Luke chapter 12 in response to a demand from a man to become the arbiter in a fight over a will. Jesus refuses to get involved in that cat fight. Instead, he uses the moment to teach a lesson. The parable, he says, is this: the land of a rich man produced plentiful, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is that with one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now, I want you to think for a moment about that parable and what it says. There are two things I want to bring out of that. One is says it begins with the land of a rich man produced plentifully. It was the land that produced, and it was God who gave the rain and God who gave the sunshine. That's how he got what he had. But he took credit for all the growth that God had given. It was what I shall do and where my crops are going to be stored and what I will do with my barn and what I will do with my life. He never really understood that everything he owned, everything he possessed was given to him. So he assumes he's in control of his world. Now, do we not fall into that trap sometimes? That we have worked hard, we have produced much, we have saved our own money, we have a right and an entitlement to what we own, what we have, what we do, what we spend. Rather than saying, I have received the blessings of God, and I am thankful that He has given me what I have because I couldn't do it. It's a different attitude. So if you see yourself as in control, if you see yourself as important, money will become a problem one way or another. So what is it that Paul does teach about money? Well, the first thing I think he teaches is you need to decide what enough is. I like what the writer of Proverbs says in Proverbs chapter 30. He says, the leech has two daughters, give and give. Three things are never satisfied. Four never say enough. Sheol, the barren womb, the land never satisfied with water, and the fire that never says enough. He says there are people who go through life much like the fire or much like the land. I have to have more and more and more. Nothing is ever enough. And you never will have enough if you don't know what enough is. How much is enough? Well, you have to determine that. I can't tell you what it is. But Paul does say in verse 6, godliness with contentment is great gain. Contentment is a term that is found usually in Greek philosophy. It's very prevalent in Stoic philosophy, for instance. It means to be independent of circumstances. If it asks the simple question, if you lose everything, would you still have enough? That's a hard question to confront unless you're confronted with it directly. Several years that Vicki and I lived on the Gulf Coast, we would at least once a year have to pack up the car and leave because there was a hurricane bearing down. I remember one time the hurricane was coming and they said it was going to hit us directly on and there probably wouldn't be a lot left standing. It did veer off and that didn't happen. But I remember sitting there in my house getting ready for the day and you had to ask yourself the question, when I drive off from my driveway and I drive back in and it's all blown away, what do I have left? And is that enough? It gets real when you pack a small car and you know that you may not have what you have worked for in 48 hours. When is enough enough? Or what about downsizing a house? Everybody kind of gets to an age that one way or another, either forced or volunteer to do it, to downsize. I remember when my father had to go to an assisted living center. He had a one-bedroom apartment. And so with a house full of furniture, what did you take? Well, it wasn't much. And you found out a bed and a chair and a few things was all that he really needed. And the rest of it stayed at the house and was sold in an estate sale. after his death. So how do you get rid of things that fit in a 3,000 square foot house that you just had to have and fit one in half its size? The answer is you have to figure out what's enough for you. How do you determine the value of a thing? The problem is we never know how much enough is really enough. I remember we built a house in our previous place, and the first house we had ever owned in our life. So we built it from the ground up. We loved that house. I watched it go up every day. And I remember that the house cost more money than I thought I could ever imagine, but it was within our budget. But I remember moving into that house. Where we were, we had the house we wanted. But now, with everything you said you needed, you don't have everything you needed. All of a sudden, you needed furniture, and you needed drapes, and you needed landscaping, and you needed this, and you needed that. And it always got bigger than the roof over your head. See, enough doesn't always translate well for us. Now, I know people who buy dream houses but have to sleep on the floor because they can't afford a bed to put in the house. They spent all the money. Now, Paul knows the answer to how much enough is. He says in verses 7 and 8, "For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content." He asks simple questions. Did you eat today? When someone says, "I don't have anything to wear," did you find something today? For almost anybody who can afford to watch this because they have a computer or internet line, you have enough food and you have enough clothing. What else do you need? Now, the rest of it is wants, not needs. Now, it's been my experience with funerals. Throughout my ministry, I've gone to houses where someone's dying or has just died, one or the other. And I'll sit there with the family, and I always wait for the funeral home to get there because I know that's a very difficult moment when they take the body from the house for the last time. Now, I've watched people with furs in their closets, a summer home in Colorado, an airplane at the airport, and they all get carried out covered by an old stained sheet. That's what you have at the end of life. We brought nothing into the world, we leave with nothing. What is enough? The Jewish rabbis would observe that a man is born with his hands clenched, trying to grasp, and dies with them open, having released it all. You want things in life, but in death you release your grip on all that is there. Have a good, long, hard talk with yourself and find out what enough means to you. If it's much more than what Paul says, are you not just wanting it, not needing it? But the second thing is determine what money can and cannot do. Paul says that money has an effect, but he says it's what it can do to you, not for you, you need to consider. He says in verse 9, "For those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." He says briefly, it tests your character. It will reveal a heart full of greed if you desire to be rich. If it's a trap that will lure you in and then hold you prisoner, those wants, those needs, those desires. You start to desire so much that it becomes your master and you become the slave. How many people are slaves to a mortgage that they couldn't afford? You're submerged and drowned in ruin and destruction. Those are two words that mean an irretrievable loss. Your soul can be in jeopardy because you can be so preoccupied with money, you have not thought about God, what He wants you to do. And the loss is irretrievable. It does that by lulling you into a sense of false security. I want to return to the parable of the farmer that Jesus tells in Luke 12. Toward the end, the man says, "So you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry." And God said, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you." Here's a man who believed his money and his wealth will give you many years of comfort. And yet at the same time, as he sits in his chair to relax, his life is taken away. He cannot see that the moment of life can end at any time and judgment will be waiting. See, there are many things that money just cannot do. It can't make you happy. We know that. One of the top 3 reasons for divorce in America is arguments over money. I mean, that's a big deal. It can break up a family. It can make you anxious. People toss and turn at night. They worry constantly. It creates mental illness trying to get their head around, how am I going to make it? It can make you greedy. You can say, I'm going to hold on to this as much as I want, and I'm not sharing with anybody. See, money can become golden handcuffs that keep you enslaved. After all, we have to look good. We have to keep up with the Joneses. What are the people down the street going to think of us driving this old car? They just got 2 new ones. And he just got a big raise. I don't seem to be keeping up. So we keep living with this illusion of perpetual need, and it keeps us in his trap. It's been said that we all start down that street, the street of illusion of what money will get us. Now, what will money get? I'd like to buy a home. Well, you can't buy a home, but you can buy a house. I'd like to have a friend. Well, you can't buy a friend, but you can buy a companion for the evening. I like some love. You can't buy love, but I'll sell you a romance novel. I'd like to have peace of mind. Well, we don't have any. We got some nice Bibles here. I'd like to buy some time. We have no time. We just sell watches. Do you hear what we said? It cannot do the things we really want it to do. Just believe it. So have a good understanding of what money cannot do for you and what it will do to you if you let it. But the third is to maintain a balanced perspective. Paul says in verse 6 that there is godliness with contentment. There are 2 things. There's the spirituality and as it interacts with money. And he says that life is really more than money. What you are is more important than what you own. Paul says that riches are uncertain. You can't depend on them. But you do know what is certain, that God and his will and your destiny, they are ahead of you. If you lose your money, you don't lose your life. But if you lose your life, you lose your money too. Paul says, as for the rich of this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. That term uncertain means we can't see the future. In the future, once everything else is gone, we face God. And he doesn't care about your bank account or your salary. He wants to know about your life, about your responses, about your relationship with him. What we know here is unknown for the future. It's what coming good or bad. I like this story. It says that one day in late summer, a farmer was working in his field with his old sick horse. The farmer felt compassion for the horse and desired to lift his burden, so he let the horse go to the mountains and live out the rest of its life. Soon after, the neighbors came from a nearby village offering their condolences. They said, "What a shame. Now your only horse is gone. How unfortunate you are. How will you live? How will you work your land? How will you prosper?" The farmer said, "Who could say? We shall see." 2 days later, the old horse returned, rejuvenated after meandering in the mountainsides while eating wild grass. 12 new and healthy horses followed the old horse into the corral. Word got out in the village that the farmer's good fortune, and it wasn't long before people arrived to congratulate him on his good luck. "How fortunate you are!" they exclaimed. "You must be delighted." The farmer said softly, "Who could say? We shall see." At daybreak the following day, the farmer's only son set off in an attempt to train the new wild horses, but the farmer's son was thrown to the ground and broke his leg. One by one, the villagers arrived to bemoan the farmer's latest misfortune. "Oh, what a tragedy you have had. Your son won't be able to help you with a broken leg. You'll have all this work to do. How will you survive?" Going about his calm, usual business, the farmer replied, "Who could say? We shall see." Several days later, war broke out. The emperor's men arrived in the village to draft all the young men into the army. As it happened, the farmer's son was deemed unfit because of his broken leg. "What good fortune you have," the villagers told him, as their sons were marched away to war. "You must be pleased." "Who could say? We shall see," replied the farmer, heading off to the field to work. As time passed, the broken leg healed, but the son limped. And again, the neighbors came to pay their condolences. "Oh, what bad luck you have. Too bad for you." But the farmer said, "Who can say? We shall see." As it turned out, the other young boys in the village died in the war, and the farmer and his son were the only men capable of working the village lands. The farmer became wealthy and gave much to the villagers. They had said, "How fortunate we are. You must be happy." To which the farmer said, "Who could say? We shall see." You don't know what the future holds. I just think about the date, October the 28th, 1929. It was a Monday. On the Friday before that, life was good. Money was flowing. Prosperity was everywhere. But on Monday, the stock market crashed, plunging America and the world into a depression that touched every household. There were those who were millionaires on Friday, but were jumping from tall buildings on Monday. They trusted in what they owned, and now there was no future. We have to depend on the fact that one day all our money will do no good when the judgment of God comes. So keep your perspective that money is only temporary, not permanent. Which brings the fourth one, to use it as God intended. In verse 19, Paul says, "Thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life." That word treasure is a word that means something that you keep. We all have treasures. We squirrel away things. They may be mementos that remind us of something, or they may be very valuable things. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus talked about treasure as well. He talked about treasure in heaven, but he also talked about men who would hide it in the earth, and it would always rust or be stolen. And that's where we get the term bank from, to hide it in the bank of the ground. But for Paul, he says the only good use of money is as a tool of eternity. See, money is a gift God gives us. And if God gives us a gift, we're supposed to use it as God would have us use it. He goes in verse 18, he says that they are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Why does God give us wealth? To do what he would do on earth, to help things, to be a benefactor. See, there are wealthy people I know that they have invested large sums of money in wonderful efforts. You may know that I've been involved in the breakfast program in Nicaragua for many years. Through that time, I've been able to see some very wealthy people give a lot of money to feed people. God blessed them, and they blessed back. In short, what does God praise in the use of money? Well, in Matthew 25, he says, did you clothe the naked, visit the prisoner, give drink to the thirsty, and food to the hungry? He said, if you had the means, why didn't you use it? I know of a millionaire who has donated to many causes, and he said the only thing he has kept through all of his life is what he's given away. It gave him joy and let him live beyond life. But one of the things that Paul says in closing is to Timothy, but for you, O man of God, flee these things. Run as fast as you can from the desire for wealth, from the greed that comes with it, for the pangs and the troubles that it brings. Flee from those things. Instead, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and gentleness. Do God's will. Believe God's word. Maintain emotional and mental balance in a world of shifting values. So how do Christians treat money? First, be grateful for what you have. Everything we have is a gift from God, and it is to be appreciated. We didn't make anything. God gave us the ability to have what we have. And what God gives, we need to recognize the source of it to keep from being conceited and keep from being haughty. He's the benefactor. We're just a recipient. We're the poor man who has gotten his gifts. Secondly, be satisfied with what you make. It's easy to grow dissatisfied thinking, I work really hard. I need more money. I hear that a lot. I am underpaid for what I do. Today in our society, we have at least 2 strikes going on, maybe a third one soon. I just want you to think, if God is gracious and he gave you a manner of work, work as hard as you can. Be a good employee. Don't complain about the money. If you need more money, then God will open a door for you. But be satisfied with what you have. But the third is to be generous to those in need. The man who has the most in life is always going to be the one who shares the most in life. So share your time, share your heart, share your money, share your life. Then you will let go rather than hold on. And Paul is all about letting go and never holding on. Perhaps Edgar Guest sums it up best in his poem about what life is about. The miser thinks he's living when he's hoarding up his gold. The soldier calls it living when he's doing something bold. The sailor thinks he's living when he's tossed about the sea. And upon this vital subject, no two of us agree. But I hold to the opinion as I walk along my way that life's made of laughter and good singing and song. I wouldn't call it a living always to be seeking gold, to bank all the present gladness for the days when I'll be old. I wouldn't call it living to spend all my strength for fame or forego the many pleasures which today are mine to claim. I wouldn't for the splendor of the world set out to roam and forsake my laughing children and the peace I know at home. Oh, that thing I call living isn't gold or fame. It's good fellowship and sunshine. It's roses by the wall. It's evenings glad with music and a hearth fire that's ablaze, and the joys which come to mortals in 1,000 different ways. It's laughter and contentment, the struggle for the goal. It's everything that's needed for the shaping of the soul. May God continue to bless us as we serve Him. Thank you for being with me today. I'm glad that you've joined me, and I hope you've enjoyed our time together as I have. Next week, we will begin the book of 2 Timothy for 4 weeks, and I hope you'll join me again then as we talk about Paul's final letter in the New Testament. Again, I appreciate you being here. Have a great day, and I'll see you again next week.